Thank you very much, Francesco. It's a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining me in this, and Francesco, in this fantastic opportunity and in such completely unique and unexpected times that we live in. Certainly, if we looked at the world and what we expected out of the economy at the beginning of 2020, nobody would have imagined that by April, we would be thinking of the biggest crisis seen since the Second World War. And it would be interesting, at least while we have the time, to address what have been the mistakes and what have been the errors of diagnosis that we have lived in order to address the future and the opportunities that that future entails. Starting with the errors of diagnosis, the first one was that most governments globally assumed that 2019 was a good year. In fact, most governments continued to expand their fiscal and, in many cases, trade deficits in an environment in which the manufacturing sector was already in contraction, and in an environment as well in which, surprisingly and worryingly, it was the service sector that maintained most of the economies alive. With most of the global manufacturing PMIs in contraction, we saw that the Eurozone barely escaped recession, and that the United States showed a level of growth that was slowing down but decent, that China was also growing well below its potential but decently, and that emerging markets showed the weakest growth in more than a decade. This is an important factor, because when we analyze GDP, global gross domestic product, it is relatively easy to keep gross domestic product at a certain level if the service sector follows through. Why? Because the service sector in developed economies is about 70% of GDP. So the first mistake that governments made into 2020 was to believe that the economy was strong. The economy was already showing extreme signs of weakness. Commodities were already weak in 2019, with copper in particular, which is a good bellwether of how economies are going to do, particularly on the industrial sector, showing surprising level of weakness, considering that there seemed to be a decently bullish environment according to central banks and according to governments. Central banks in this play a very important role. In the past 5 years, without a recession, without any sign of weakness in the labor market, and with an environment of complete exuberance in equity and fixed income markets, global central banks continued to cut rates and increase liquidity, particularly in the Eurozone, where the European Central Bank was injecting and repurchasing assets, although the assets that it was purchasing were already yielding negative real and nominal rates, in fact. So central banks played an important role in giving us a view of strength that was actually not that right. We finally found ourselves with a situation that was viewed very optimistically. Any one of you that followed the international press or the financial media in January was probably surprised, or at least not worried about the situation in China of the coronavirus, because global markets reached an all-time high. Who would remember that a few months later? but global markets reached all-time highs in January, with the amount of negative yielding bonds reaching a level of $13 trillion globally. This level of equity market exuberance and the fact that markets were soaring despite the coronavirus impact in China led us to keep our guard down to something that was already becoming an issue. So we went from a shock of optimism to a shock of pessimism. The shock of optimism was broken by the reality of the severity of the coronavirus pandemic, and the inability of governments to tackle it adequately. So what was a scare at the beginning became a health crisis, and the health crisis has become obviously a very high mortality and a very weakening element for the global healthcare systems, straining the healthcare systems to levels that we had not seen in recorded history. Not even in World War II were the sanitary systems and healthcare systems as strained as they are today in the developed markets. So this led to an unprecedented move from governments. And governments decided to do something that we have never seen in history, which is to shut down the economy entirely. So to a healthcare crisis, governments decided to lock down the economy under the impression that shutting down the economy for a month, maybe two, would have absolutely no impact on the midterm. Furthermore, with the idea that if you shut down the economy, it doesn't create ripple effects long term. Thankfully, we have experience of knowing that that is not the case. The economy is absolutely does not work like a watch, where you stop and you start it almost as you want it, as a stopwatch. The economy works like an organism, like a living body. And if, in order to address a healthcare situation, you decide to shut down the heart, which is of a living body, which is the economy, what tends to happen is that you kill the body, which is not dissimilar to what they've done, to what governments have done, and they are starting to address right now. They're starting to realize the severity of the impact of what they thought would happen. Most governments, when they started these measures, and I had the opportunity of speaking with, I would say, a good 15 governments of the developed world, they were absolutely adamant that it would have absolutely no relevant impact, that the impact on employment would be very small, and that it would recover on a V shape. That is gone. That is not going to happen. It will not happen at all. They have realized now that shutting down the economy is as bad as ignoring a pandemic. And they've also, I think, finally realized that the leading countries globally that have addressed both the pandemic and addressed keeping alive the business fabric of the country are the ones that are going to exit best and in a stronger way out of this big crisis that we have gotten into. The implications are enormous. First, we cannot just ignore the fact that the collapse in global commodity prices and the collapse in the storage systems in the commodity complex are going to generate very long-term impacts on the economies of the emerging world. Why? Because it's not just about the oil or the copper or the natural gas sectors. It is all that is linked to them, and economies that are very dependent on the export revenues that they receive. Export revenues are collapsing because not just the volumes that are sold are coming down, but because the price of what is being sold is coming down to levels that we had never seen. Just a couple of days ago, the May contract of WTI, West Texas in the United States, went to negative for the first time in history. And I remember vividly in an OPEC meeting, a friend of mine that said oil prices would never go to negative. Yeah? Today, oil prices are recovering to $15 a barrel. This also creates financial implications. Financial implications on a financial sector, the banking sector, that was not strong in 2019 or 2018. The financial sector continues to have a level of non-performing loans, particularly in the Eurozone. It's about 3% of total assets that have come down, but it's still a very significant number. It's about 620 billion euros of non-performing loans. The banking sector is also, because of negative rates, getting the worst return on tangible equity seen in the last 2 decades. And because of negative rates as well, the risk of the assets embedded in the balance sheets of banks is not small. So what we're seeing is all these ripple effects. We're seeing the financial implications. We're seeing the country implications. For example, some emerging economies, as we speak now, will be completely unable to pay the salaries of civil servants next month because of the slump in commodity prices. So there's huge and varied ramifications that are also showing us that when the economy comes back, it is not going to come back as if nothing had happened. The whole pattern of consumption of global economies is changing as we speak. What we are seeing today, that we can enjoy this wonderful Cenacolo on a screen from home using great technology, is happening all over the place. It's happening all over the world. And people all over the world are going to do, as from the reopening of the economy, what each and every one of us that used to travel every year to South Korea. I used to go every year to South Korea until the year 2003. The year 2003 was the year of SARS. I never went back to South Korea. Everything I do with that beautiful country is via this. What I'm trying to say is that our decisions of consumption, our decisions of tourism, our decisions of investments are going to be affected by this shock that we have lived. Not just because the economy is shutting down or because the airports are shut down, because the mentality of people is changing so quickly that we still have no clear idea of where that is likely to go. And that comes back to the point of the services sector that was, in the case of most global economies, the saving grace of 2019. Another important factor is what this crisis, these few months, even if it's a few months, which by the way it will not be, but even if it's a few months, impact generates ripple effects in the economy in numerous ways. The first one is that the governments are going to do massive actions. So we're seeing enormous packages of aid to the economy coming from a fiscal side and enormous packages in aid of the economy from the monetary side. And you can summarize them all in 2 sentences. The world is going to bail out the past and let the future die. This is what everybody is doing. What everybody is going to be doing, the trillions of dollars put by governments to bail out the so-called strategic sectors are going to bail out the sectors that were already in trouble in 2019, the sectors that were already in overcapacity in 2019, the sectors that were already generating poor returns in 2019, whilst at the same time, because of lack of fiscal and lack of monetary space to do everything, it is going to let the high productivity sectors, the sectors that are changing the economy, die. Startups are collapsing as we speak. every day. We are seeing at the same time how the capital that the market has for research and development has completely dried up and will be fundamentally devoted to recapitalize the old economy. We are also seeing that those most of these packages not most of these packages, let's put this clearly, all of these packages that are being presented by governments globally are going to address a crisis that is a supply crisis with a forced shutdown of the economy, with the tools with which they would address the 2008 crisis. That's what they're doing. Governments globally are taking the actions to address 2008 in 2020. And 2020 has nothing to do with 2008. 2008, you had an issue of credit demand. This is not an issue of credit demand. In fact, the sectors that are dying as we speak, I read this morning that my country, Spain, loses 100 companies a day, 100 businesses a day. This is unprecedented. But this is something that's very interesting. Which companies are collapsing? The companies that are collapsing are the ones that actually did their homework after the crisis. The ones that did not have access to debt, therefore will not get bailed out because they're not the clients or the ones that had access to credit in the first place. The companies that don't have assets, the companies that have a business that is rented and employees and live off revenues. It's very interesting this, because if we think about the misallocation of capital that existed in the 2008 crisis and in the 2001 crisis, what we are going to see right away is a much larger misallocation of capital. And worst of all, this one is going to be fully directed from the government's perspective. It is actually surprising that in a country like the United States that has the most open and free economy that there is, the whole intention of the actions of the government is coming to bail out, for example, the shale sector. The one that actually would have absolutely no problem in seeing reallocation of capital and the most efficient companies coming stronger and the least efficient ones being absorbed. It's very, very interesting, because that leads us to the future. And the future is the following. What these massive programs of huge stimulus packages from the fiscal side, plus huge stimulus packages from the monetary side do, is first create a gigantic deflationary spiral. How can a massive injection of capital, of money, into the economy generate deflation? Because all of that money is going to current spending by governments that are already hugely indebted and have massive twin deficits in most cases. Second, because it's going to bail out existing overcapacity. So what happens then is that all the unemployment that is created takes longer to be unraveled. The massive unemployment, unprecedented levels of unemployment, the most bearish analysts that I have seen in the world would have never thought that the United States would have had 20 million jobless claims in a matter of weeks. The unprecedented levels of unemployment will likely be very difficult to recover because of that effect that I was telling you. The companies that and the businesses and the sectors that will be bailed out and secured are the ones that were actually not generating the jobs that were reducing unemployment in the first place. And the ones that are dying are the ones that were actually creating the employment. So it'll be more difficult for unemployment to reduce after this. Second factor, fiscal. What you hear every day from mainstream economists all over the world is, now is the time for governments to spend, and then there will be a time to save. Well, that is a very nice rhetoric, but starts from a very big mistake. is that the first thing is that governments were already spending like there was no tomorrow. In the countries that we all live in, spending to GDP has gone to the highest levels in history at about 42, 45, in some cases 56. I'm thinking of the countries that we were talking about. In other cases, in the lowest cases, we're talking of 35% of GDP. Governments were already spending dramatically, and we're already finding it difficult to finance those deficits. So the deficit problem of 2020 will not be reduced in 2021, and even less so in 2022. It will not be addressed. And what that is likely to do is that if you add to a deflationary spiral created by incentivizing overcapacity, you add another, which is a massive increase in taxes to try to reduce the deficits that governments have incurred in this spend now and think about later, that generates another problem, which is stagflation. The problem of stagflation is created afterwards because by bailing out the past and killing the future, you also do something that we all here have seen before, which is destroy supply chains. It's already happening as we speak. So on one side, you are destroying supply chains, and on the other side, you are trying to incentivize a demand that is not going to come back via monetary and fiscal policy. So what ends up happening is that the economy does not grow, but prices start to creep up. And you will see the base effect. Obviously now, we look at the screen on commodities and you say, wow, commodities are down 70%. Watch when they are up from -70, +20, +20, yet the economy is growing 2% instead of 8%. This is a very important factor, base effect in investment, because the corporate sector is not strong enough to address the issues of balance sheet reaction that we are seeing as we speak. Today, the companies that have done the best in terms of reducing debt in the last years, simply through the collapse of EBITDA and the increase in working capital, their debt to EBITDA, and these are figures presented by Moody's this morning, will triple. Net debt, companies that had 1.5 times net debt to EBITDA will go to 4-5 times net debt to EBITDA. And those are the good ones. Now think about the companies that decided to take these years, the great opportunity of low interest rates, and decided to increase debt dramatically. Those will go to substandard level. And they will find capital to finance themselves, but that capital will be absorbed from the high productivity sectors. So the risk is that the recovery is much slower, and the job creation is much slower. And at the same time, that prices, as supply chains are broken, and none of us would agree with this, but what another side effect of this crisis, and it's already happening in some countries like Japan and others, and the messages are being heard all over the place, will be the increase in interventionism and the increase in protectionism, which will also exacerbate the stagflation impact. So, doesn't look good, does it? It does not, to be fairly honest. And the solutions that are being presented are the wrong ones. The stimulus packages are fully aimed at the sectors that they should not go to. There is absolutely no problem in the world if the economy reopens, once the economy reopens, to recapitalize the sectors at the right price and at the right returns. What is the problem? That governments don't want that. What governments want is at the wrong price and at the worst returns. That is, and as such, the level of misallocation of capital will be enormous. So it doesn't look good, but there is hope, and there is great hope. The reason why there's great hope is that, like, we have gotten out of every single crisis in history we will not get out because of these enormous bailouts, and we will not get out because of these monstrous liquidity injections. We will get out thanks to, I'm going to pitch my book, thanks to this, to social capitalism. My book, Co-Freedom or Equality, that you have available in all good bookstores and also in the bad ones, but at a higher price, it talks about what has been going on in the economy underground, these enormous and completely bloated stimulus and redirection and intervention and protectionism that we have seen in the last years. What we are seeing is exactly what is going to actually drive the economy stronger, maybe not in 2021, maybe not in 2022, but certainly in 2023, is precisely the chains of adaptation and interlink between the capitalist societies and the levels of human ingenuity developed in the open economy. What does it mean? What does this mean? Sounds very interesting. What does this mean? What it means is that companies globally are already repairing the supply chains that governments will break through intervention and protectionism. They're already doing it. Technology disruption is already doing what we are seeing right now, which is our ability to have this conference and to enjoy and to share the ideas that we will all have. Technology disruption is going to prevent that the stagflation process that governments will try to do, will actively lead us to, will be much more moderate than the risk that they can actually make. That is fantastic. That is fantastic. Third, a very important factor is demographics. In everything that the government and central banks are doing these days to address the situation, there is one thing that they ignore willingly, which is demographics, which is the longevity of developed economies and the rise of the middle class and the youth of emerging economies. It is precisely demographics what is also going to work as a fantastic disinflationary force that will prevent us from getting into a much worse risk of stagflation long term. And that is also part of the solution, because the aging and longevity in developed economies is going to be improved and the ability of those economies to grow thanks to the talent and thanks to the opportunities that will come from the new talent and the innovation created by the youth that is actually entering the middle class right now. The fourth element is healthcare. If there's, contrary to what most of you have read everywhere, this is not a crisis that would have been solved by higher spending in healthcare. Absolutely no way. But think about it. The country that has the highest mortality per million inhabitants, it's Brussels. That has the highest government spending in the Eurozone and also the highest spending in healthcare per capita. This is not a crisis due to lack of spending. This is a crisis due to lack of prevention and management. So what will generate the opportunities for the future will be prevention, management, and capitalist control of the healthcare systems. That is competition. More competition, more human ingenuity, technology that will break the barriers that governments will try to implement, youth and longevity that will improve the demographic situation of most countries in one way or the other, and the interaction between sectors that are the ones that today in a lockdown have proven that if we had had a massive level of interventionism in the economy, today we would not be having this wonderful cup of tea and enjoying this beautiful cenacolo and being able to eat and enjoy electricity. What is actually the interaction between those sectors that has allowed us to continue. And this is what we need to be positive about, that the long-term forces that were eroding the plans of the inflationary plans of governments are intact, and that they will be the solution. The solution will not be having government spending 70, 80, 90% of GDP, because if there's a fact is that the citizens of Singapore, the citizens of Korea that spend a lot less in healthcare and a lot less in government than we do, have been enormously more able to manage the pandemic than we have been. Just a final word on the financial sector. The financial sector is being used to bail out the old economy. This is extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. All governments are placing in the balance sheet. If you look at the projects and the programs that have been implemented by the major economies in the Eurozone in particular, but also in the developed world in general, the vast majority of the bailout plans and the packages to address the crisis are literally more loans in the balance sheet of banks given to companies that are in very, very difficult positions, not just today, but a year ago or 2 years ago, and that will make the balance sheet of banks a lot more unstable in the future. So we need to understand that the recapitalization of the economy is not just going to come from banks. It needs to come from a more diversified, more open, and more globalized market in which investors that have the capital are going to see the opportunities in the right sectors to finance. So banks will be able to address the situation. Absolutely, they will. Banks have been strengthening their balance sheet and reducing their risks in the worst environment possible, which is of negative interest rates and worsening of economic growth. But we cannot expect banks to bail out.
No. I would like to invite you to close this first stage, because after, I suppose that you have to continue to speak, also answering. No, but please finish your thoughts.
That is it. No, that was it. That was basically it. You were absolutely spot on time. I just had finished with my remarks. So that's the way that I see the future. If I'm right, and governments and companies and banks prepare themselves for what I just said, they will get stronger. If I am wrong and the world recovers in a V-shaped recovery, they will also be stronger. But if I am right and you prepare yourself for a V-shaped recovery, this crisis will be a depression. And if I am wrong and it is an even worse situation than what I just meant, and you prepare yourself for a V-shaped recovery, this will be an absolute nightmare to get out of.
Thank you so much. I would like to propose, perhaps this is the first time, because this is the third edition of Cenacolo Online, but it could be interesting. This is the first time, so sorry if happened something not good. But I invite you to open your microphone, everybody. Please open your microphone for a moment. Okay, Daniel, also your microphone. Lorenzo, Pierre. Make an applause to Professor Lacalle, please. Really, thank you so much, Daniel, for your wonderful intervention. And now, starting the discussion of our Cenacolo, we have the privilege of having one of the most important Italian women, like I told you before, among us at the United Nations in New York, Chief of the Strategic Partnership at the United Nations Population Fund. Thank you, Dottoressa Cutillo, for your participation. I would like to ask your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, first of all. I was actually introduced to the Cenacolo by a very good friend here. Actually introduced me to this, so thank you so much. I'll try and be very brief, and apologies again because I'll have to leave in a few minutes. But just, I wanted to share with you some reflections that came to my mind when listening to Professor Lacalle. And the first one is this. So last year, January 2019, I was in Davos. So my agency actually deals with the sexual and reproductive rights agenda of the United Nations. We deal with maternal health, we deal with family planning, we deal with population data, and I'll go briefly to the demographics piece. So I remember distinctively when I was in Davos in 2019, that on the one hand you had Christine Lagarde, who at some point said, be aware that we're probably at the eve of a new recession. So this was a piece of conversation that was happening in a piece of Davos. And then there was another piece of conversation that was around innovative solutions, particularly health solutions, that was so fascinating, charming. But one thing I could not avoid to notice was that there was almost no communication between these two pieces. So we were at the eve of a big recession, and probably, as our speaker was saying, governments didn't listen enough to this. And on the other hand, our all fantastic world of innovation that as not only as a UN official, but as a common person of the road, as we would say, if I look at that innovation and I look at the situation where we are now, I ask myself, well, that innovation probably was something that was just utopical. So this was the first thing I wanted to put on the table. The second thing I wanted to put on the table was this. So as Professor Lacalle says, we are in this situation. There was a level of unpredictability. Now, if I see the programs where we work, particularly in some geographies, particularly if I look at Africa, particularly if I look at situations that are always in a humanitarian fragile condition, and that unfortunately we don't talk a lot about during these days, like in the Middle East, for example, that unpredictability is even more unpredictable. So we are at a stage now, but we're seeing, for example, that what is happening in Africa still has a great level of unpredictability. So we are at a situation now that still has a lot to see and evolve, particularly in some geographical areas. The third thing I wanted to bring to the table, yes, the demographics. I just wanted to mention, and my agency is actually the one that accompanies governments in census, that this year should have been the year of a big census round for many countries. Now, there's a lack of data on demographics, and there's a lack of data on demographics that is there in normal conditions, and is there and will be there now, and will affect a lot the outcome and the future of this crisis. Now, said all this, I am a convinced and passionate optimist, and I think that something anyway this crisis will have to teach us, something different. best practices, prevention, yes. I also look at a piece of conversation which is around leadership. Probably we will need to rethink the criteria through which we measure leadership. A leadership, yes, that looks at social capital, a leadership that looks at resilience, and a leadership. So at the United Nations, we have this, this one of the pillars is leaving no one behind. So making sure that everybody is included in the conversations, the most fragile, the most left behind. Well, I think this is teaching us something on that, and leaders will have to find innovative ways to build resilience. And probably just finally on the health systems, I agree that investment, further investment, is probably not the solution. I would say is not probably the only solution. We see many, many cases every day that a further investment can make a difference, and the disruption, because we're talking about disruption of the health systems now, is showing that. And one of the things that I would like to say, and it also comes from my past in the private sector, I think that one thing that is coming up very strongly now is the famous public-private partnerships. Debate for many years. We are very much in the front line for this, but a new way also of thinking and conceiving public-private partnerships. I think I have finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Rosa Cutillo, for your words, your intervention, also for introducing the need to work on a new leadership, a modern leadership, inclusive leadership. Of course, this team could be a new team for a new Cenacolo, in which I hope that you will participate again. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Moving now on the USA to the largest city of the West Coast, Los Angeles, I welcomed Ambassador De Luca Gabrielli. Thank you, Ambassador, for your participation.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Lacalle, for this very, very interesting insight about his vision about the economic implication of this crisis. I'm not an economist, and I'm more interested in other kind of aspect that this crisis will impact. It's a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, but the implication at the cultural, political, and international level are humongous. And one thing that struck me about what the professor said, you see a kind of a solution, or the light at the end of the tunnel around 2022, 2023. Now, this is really very scary because we are in a crisis that's still in progress. Now, which will be the result of this? We will only know when the crisis will be over. Because if we have a solution in let's say, in few months, 2-3 months, the situation will be able to go back to the normal, the implication will be a certain time. But if you have to wait, as it seems these days, that to really have the end of the crisis, the moment we have the vaccine, then it means to talk about a year and a half. Now, the impact of all this, not only at economic level, but at social level, at a political level, is really scary. This is, I read it many times and I agree, this is not a crisis that will change the world, but it will change the pace at which things will change. And the impact again, I was reading, maybe you have read it too, this article of this Yuval Harari on the Financial Times the other day, so the impact, how much it will impact at the level of, how to say, the control that the government will have on the citizen, this application and so on. This can introduce the element of very scary, and how much the government will control the individuals. The implication at the level of, as I say, social and culture. The disruption that is creating now within the families, within the everybody is impacted. But I was discussing with my son the other day, we reacted to this lockdown. He's 15 years old, he doesn't go to school, he does it online. I say, oh, but at the end of the day, it's not that such a big deal, this lockdown. Yeah, but it was very harsh with him. He said, it's not a big deal for you, but he doesn't realize how much this will impact families that live in conditions they are not the one we live in. They don't have the kind of financial resilience that we may have. 40% of the American people, they don't have $400 in their bank account. They live check by check. Now, if this crisis will continue for a long time, how this will react, how this will impact the social. I was listening in an interview a few days ago with another economist from the New York University. Can't remember the name of that, Nouriel Roubini. He was talking about the social impact, the possibility of social unrest. And it's possible, it's there. When people doesn't have money, what has to do? How can react? Professor Lacalle talked about macroeconomics, which is extremely interesting, but how much it will translate into the real life of people and how these people react, to me is very scary. You said at the beginning, and this is not a tradition of this seminar to put question, but I think that we have on the table just question, and we're trying to look for answers. I think that the answer we will have again when the crisis will over. And until then, we still see this crisis to develop, to unfold, and the consequences, the possible consequences to me are very scary. I leave it there with a lot of question mark, not for professor, but for all of us, to see how this will really impact our life. Hopefully in not such a negative way, but it doesn't seem the picture very, very, very optimistic.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And then I would like to ask to give the floor to a very important entrepreneur that we have in this Cenacolo. He is the president of one of the most important ship owners of Europe, Italy and Europe. So I thank you again for your participation, President Augusto Kosulic. And
yes. Thank you, and good evening to everybody. First of all, I'm not Luisa Vaccari, guru, but this iPad, it belongs to my wife, which is a famous yoga teacher, and therefore my iPad is in the office. I forgot it there, so I'm using the iPad of my wife. My name is Augusto Kosulic. Okay, today I had a very nice day. I was very happy because I did some good business. But after listening the speech by Professor Lacalle, I am ready to jump out of my window and finish with my life. I mean, So with all due respect, I'm not an economist. I'm not a professor. I am a businessman, as you said, Francesco, and I work every day, day to day with. In the environment of business. So I have to say that I do not agree fully with the speech of Professor Lacalle. I am much more optimistic. I think the companies that have been smart in the past 10 years, and they have developed in a nice way with the diversification, with new objective, and changing our way of business, and they have not distributed dividends. They have been saving money. Now they are very strong. like I read in an article in the New York Times, there is no capitalism without bankruptcy, and there is no religion without hell. So I mean, I've never drank champagne when I made a lot of money. This year I will lose money. So what? The most important asset of my company are the people, and I will never get rid of my people because they are the key of my success. So I mean, this year I will lose money. Never mind. And next year will be better. I think there is a lot of opportunity instead nowadays. There is a lot of things you can do if you are smart, if you are financially strong, you can survive, and you can do even better than what you were doing before. So I don't want to say too much because the limit is 3 minutes, but I say, guys, I mean, I don't know who is an entrepreneur in this group of people, but for the one who are entrepreneur, don't give it up. We will make it, and if you are smart, and if you have a good team, and if you have good relationship with the bank, you will make it, and you will make even more money in 2021. So don't give it up.
Thank you, President Kosulic. Of course, I fully agree with your thoughts, and I would also add that our way of working is to collect after this Cenacolo from each participant a paper of 1-2 page short paper in which participant summarize their thoughts, and we collect all this contribution and sharing after between the participants. Now we already did this exercise. It is very interesting because, of course, there are each one. We have separate worlds. At this table there are a different kind of people, job, or countries. So I invite you each one to send me after Cenacolo your thoughts, so I could collect and distribute and sharing for everyone. Thank you again, Augusto, for your really kind participation and your brilliant thoughts. Thank you. So I would like to now to change countries, and we have at the table an economist, but also is a author of very important books of economy, and he came from like a job from bank. So he live in Paris, and Pierre Lazoum, thank you for your participation. And we would appreciate it if you could share your thoughts. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you very much. And well, thank you for all of us to welcome me in this Cenacolo. And thank you very much to Professor Lacalle for his scaring but excellent description of the situation. I think one important dimension he mentioned is the fact that the government did not react well, except in East Asia and some countries, and mainly, I think, for political reasons. And they will be driven by political considerations all along, and including in the future. So it's true that they will not consider priorities in relation with the economic situation, but with political situation. So there is absolutely no correlation between quantity of money that is spent in health issues and the solution to that crisis. This was mentioned also by Professor Lacalle, and it is very important because it has not been understood by most people, and certainly not in my country. the reaction in my country is to ask for more money spent in health issues. Well, it may be justified for other reasons, but not for reasons linked with that specific epidemic. So it means that there will be a strong pressure for government intervention not linked with real needs in this case, and no reflection on the real issue, which is the fact that the result has been completely different between countries with an excellent collective organization and capacity of reaction, like in Eastern Asia, except China, which is a special case, but the case of Taiwan, Korea, and others is very clear. Those societies work much better than ours. That's very clear. In Europe, there's also the differentiation between countries that obviously collectively work in a better way, like Germany, and others that don't work as well as Germany or Sweden or others, like Italy, like France, or the United Kingdom. So it's not a question of Latin against Latin and so on. It's Latin and Anglo-Saxon against East Asians and Germans. So it's a very important dimension, but there is no political perception of that. So the risk is that governments will continue in the wrong direction according to the spontaneous tendency of each country. In most countries, and certainly in France, for that matter, it will be in the direction of spending. And as coming from a background of finance and with some experience in financial crises are always linked with debt. Debt is the fuel for crisis. And we are increasing debt in a huge way. Well, I can understand that at the point where they are in the middle of the ford, it's logical to do that. But the problem is that they will continue to do that, including when it will not be the appropriate answer. And so there will be a growing differentiation between countries that work well together and other countries. And in this case, it's not been leadership, because I don't see very strong leadership in East Asia. It's collective action, quality of the interaction of people in the decision-making process. Well, of course, it doesn't mean that leadership is not important. It's very important, especially when collective action doesn't work well. You need more leadership. But it's true that there is a big advantage when the collective culture is superior. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre de Zoom. You introduced an important concept again on the quality of the human relations, about the social capital. So this is another pillar that it was very, very important to deep. Thank you for your thoughts. And now I would like to come back to entrepreneur, because of course we have at the table a very important entrepreneur who work in a luxury sector and the top level, international level, and Conte Lorenzo Rossi di Montelera. Thank you, Lorenzo, for coming, for participating to this first international version of Cenacolo Online. And your perspective would be most welcome.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me? Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, I hear you. Yes,
fine. Well, okay, just a few words. Professor Lacalle has a nightmare, and understood at the end of his speech. And the issue there's not much time to wake you out of your nightmare, Professor. It's a matter of a few weeks. Things are happening very, very fast. So unfortunately, don't think we have a lot of time for analyzing the situation, but see how can we do something. in order to address the issue we are in. There are three remarks I would like to leave with us, with all of us. One issue is about the governments in our countries in general. I also, as you said before, I am a man of the ground. I am operating in different countries. Governments we have all over are making big mistakes on one hand because of their ideology, and they go after that ideology. Most of them by ignorance. They don't have the culture to address this kind of problems. And finally, there is a huge lack of leadership on their side. But there they are, and what's going to happen next is something that is part of the problem. And of course, it was correct to mention possible social unrest. It was said just some time before, because they are leading our countries in the wrong direction. The second point, you mentioned misallocation of capital and assets, which is the other big issue. Helicopter money, as you said before, the assets or capital are allocated as debt to the operators on the ground, and that may be okay to get through the next few weeks or months, but then it doesn't address the issue. And that is the second major problem. Just as a comparison, if we remember the Marshall Plan, which was the only similar situation from an economic point of view that we went through, the Marshall Plan was allocating money to producing, to rebuilding the economy, and not just to address as you said before, the old economy, the economy that is going away, but trying to build the new economy. This is probably the most significant misallocation of that in this present situation. And finally, like to consider that what will be extremely important is the reaction of the populations towards rebuilding a wealthy future, if you wish. We are talking mainly about democracies, but not only democracies, but of course it's very important what will happen next, and what we can see already, that the reaction is being different, whether you are in the USA, Canada, in Europe, or in Asia. It's not the same. I don't think we can base it on the same behavior. We have seen that in the past, and the most recent one, of course, was the 2008 crisis, and that was addressed differently. I think it will be addressed differently. And just to put a grain of hope, or I think also yesterday, the day before, and just joining a group of 50 family businesses, young generation mostly. You could hear the will there was to fight for a reconstruction of the situation, and not just jumping from the window, as said before. So just close with a question to Professor Lacalle. What we want is to disperse your nightmare. What can we do? What should we do, in your opinion? Because this nightmare you will you probably wake up to a much better situation, but as long as all of us try to fight in the right direction. Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for your intervention. And I would like to ask to give floor to another completely field linked, of course, with the field of shipping, represented by Augusto Kosuric, but is linked, but with the dynamics completely different. I mean the infrastructure and all logistic, and we have the pleasure to have with us one of the most important opinion leader is Umberto Masucci. You are welcome, Umberto, and thank you for your participation. He's the president of F2I Holding Portuale, and first is president of International Propeller Club of Italy. And thank you so much, Umberto, for your coming. Your perspective will be most welcome.
Thank you to you, Francesco, for organizing such an interesting Cenacolo, and thank to Professor Lacalle for his very interesting introduction and keynote speech. Well, I want to start with positive news, as my friend Augusto Kosuric did. Yesterday, in the full nightmare of coronavirus, we, F2I, have concluded the acquisition of a new company. F2I is Italy's largest independent infrastructure funds, and we have as F2I more than 5 billion investment in energies, in telecommunication, in transport and logistic, airports. So the last one year ago, was the ports. And they asked me, because of my experience in the port sector, to become the president of the port division of F2I. I accepted this new challenge, and I must say I am very happy today, since yesterday, just yesterday, as I said, we took over a company which is Compagnia Ferroviaria Italiana, which is Italy's third largest cargo freight operator as a railways. This in order to give integration between the ports, logistic, our clients, and really this is something that I take also as a positive news for the outcome from coronavirus. Means F2I considered to conclude the deal and to continue investing in infrastructures in logistic and ports. We are at the same time targeting new possible port in Italy, and why not in Mediterranean and in Europe, since we do believe that the port and the logistic are really fundamental for the economy, particularly when we will come out from coronavirus. Of course, I think we all must change our mentality, thinking to the port sector in Italy, but I think also in Mediterranean, which is a fundamental area for shipping. I remind everybody that 20% of all ships and cargo moving in the world pass through Gibraltar and Suez, through Mediterranean. And we, Italy, represent 40% of the Mediterranean trade. So I think we must take this opportunity to implement even more efficiency in the ports, which means reduce our costs in order to face the needs of being competitive also for the goods coming in and coming out from Italy and from European ports, reduce our costs, aggregate companies, and these we could achieve by reducing bureaucracy, by having more competition, as somebody said. And I am positive of that. I think we could achieve that and be of service to the goods, to the economy, which require even more competitive and efficient port and logistics service and system. A couple of general considerations, which I am not an economist either, but I think possibly we should change the sequence of duties and rights. In Italy and in Europe, at least I know very well worldwide, but in Italy I have my full perspective. We were thinking first to the right and then to the duties. Allow me that we should a little bit think more to the duties and then the rights immediately after. And another consideration, we should be working more than in the past, getting possibly the same money of the past. I wouldn't say less, but I think when I travel to China, I build ships in China, in Vietnam, recently even. I see that, of course, they think more to their duties and rights, and they work. I don't want to give up with welfare. I would not to give up with democracy, but I think the time has come also for the old Europe and for Italy to be less bureaucratic, more efficient, more duty side, respecting rights and democracy. And on that, I have my question to Mr. Lacalle. Do you think, Mr. Lacalle, that Europe will come out of coronavirus weaker versus US, China, and Russia? Are we? You make the reference. You made reference to demographic as well. Are we a too old continent to compete with three other big countries like China, Russia, and US, or we can compete still? Thank you.
Thank you, Umberto. Thank you, President. Now we are in a moment very, very particular, because, of course, this is the destiny of our Cenacolo, because we're starting to create online, of course, because in live, normally there are not this problem, but online we have scheduled no, first 1 hour, but 1 hour absolutely. After 1 hour and half, no, enough. Now 2 hours, but effectively the time flies. So if we want close sharp 8:30, we have 30 minutes. We have 30 minutes and. With a lot of very interesting and important participants from different countries, and also we have to, we want everybody hear the final remarks of Professor Lacalle. So I would like to recommend you now, if we want to speak everybody, as I think that it must, because participation Cenacolo is something that preview the sharing of idea of all participants. So if we can follow the time in 2-3 minutes, perhaps we can do that. And we are in Europe. We are in Europe, but in a vocational island that has a vocation to be international, to defend always the values of freedom and also the respect of the principles I am speaking about of course, about Malta, that is an island very, very friend and close to Italy, but at the same time, it has an international vocation. Lawrence Gonzi. Thank you, Lawrence, to coming. He's an international lawyer, but he has first minister of Malta. Thank you again, Lawrence, and really appreciate if you could please share your thoughts. You should put the microphone.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you, Professor Lacalle. I am perhaps the only one in this group that has a little bit of active experience as being a politician and being in the hot seat as a prime minister, and I lived through the financial crisis, so I know what a difficult situation is and what tough decisions need to be taken. I have listened carefully to Professor Lacalle's presentation, but let me, and I agree practically with everything he said, but the reality on the ground is this. First of all, I think the lesson that we've learned is that we have not been prepared globally for the kind of pandemic that we have faced. And I think we are now realize that for the future, this pandemic could repeat itself, and our systems need to be prepared for that. The second point, it seems that governments all over the world have decided in the midst of this crisis that the health consideration is more important than the economic consideration. In other words, a difficult decision was taken by practically all governments. They had to choose whether to let the economy survive and therefore take risks with the health of citizens, or whether to place as a priority the health of citizens and let the economy suffer, even if possibly temporarily. Interesting, because I doubt whether governments have ended up in this dilemma in this particular situation. But the fact is that the decisions that have been taken have given precedence to the health aspect of citizens. And I consider that to be a positive aspect. Now, I need also to make a third point, also very briefly, but putting it on the table. I am also, in my profession as a lawyer and as a retired politician, I also chair a number of companies, local companies in Malta. One of them is an international company with business also in the United States. And I've got to know some details, in some detail, part of the package that has been proposed in some countries, but also in the United States. And I note that in the majority of cases, governments are designing their packages in a way that encourages employers in the private sector to keep employees on their books. In other words, to encourage employers not to go down to redundancies, but to keep employees, their employees on their books. Now, I consider this to be extremely important, because if the crisis, the health crisis starts to settle down and the economy starts to recover, the most important thing is to have workers back in their factories, on their workplace as quickly as possible. And therefore, I must, and I conclude here, I must emphasize, perhaps Professor Lacalle can comment on this, that not all packages are actually loans that will increase debt, but some packages are actually designed intelligently in order to encourage employers to keep their workers on their books. That's
thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Lawrence. Of course, your thoughts needs more deepening, but you, as usual, has been very, very concise. So thank you for that. And really, it's very important that Professor Lacalle could be the possibility to answer also these questions. So I would like to. We have two participants that are following our Cenacolo, and now is one o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, I mean the participant from Novosibirsk, and I would like to ask first entrepreneur, both entrepreneur, but with different fields. He participated already to Cenacolo in London, and he has Christina like translator. So Samuel, your thoughts, of course, in the economy of the moment, hoping that we could have other kind of initiative like that. Thank you for participating.
Во-первых, спасибо огромное, Франческа, за такую возможность общения с такими великими людьми.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for inviting us and giving us an opportunity to speak to important people like this.
Я не экономист, как ты заметил, да, я предприниматель.
I'm not an economist, like you said, but I'm an entrepreneur.
But first time I would like my daughter to say a few words, because it's her specialty. Is that possible? And then I will tell my short opinion, because I feel all the situation on myself and my business. Christina, please.
If you don't mind, I'll say a few words and then I'll tell him to speak. I'm also not a professional, but I study economics at the university, so I can understand the situation as well, and I have a few thoughts to add to this discussion. First, I wanted to say that I do agree that the packages that governments are now trying to implement are not really working well, because like Professor Daniel Lacalle said before, this is not about this crisis shouldn't be dealt with like it was in 2008. It's completely different, and the approach should be different. And this crisis is much deeper as well. So just by doing the fiscal side and reducing interest rates won't help in this case, because we are completely shutting down the demand, and businesses can't function without demand and can't cover costs to have all the workforce in place. We can look at the US, for example, with the increase in unemployment rates, and no one expected that, but it keeps going up. And we know that healthcare system in the US requires a lot of money, and people who are unemployed are almost unable to get that help. So the testing would be much harder. So that leads to the management problem that was mentioned before. Another short thing that I wanted to add was I think this crisis also teaches us something else, because right now we have a lot of jobs that are there just for the money purposes, but they don't add the value to the society as much. So we see that those jobs are being eroded completely, and only the most essential part of the economy is there. So I think that we should look into that and take that into account too, and maybe rethink about our values and how the economy should function later on. So I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Samuel. Thank you so much, Christina. I will come back. I will come back in Italy, and I will give the floor to Professor Rinaldi for her thoughts on the topic. She's a lecturer in university in sociology at the University of Milano Bicocca. She's a very interesting point of view, because effectively at the table there is no other specialist in this important science of sociology. Thank you, Professor, for coming. Ecco.
Francesco.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. I will try to be very short. I am a sociologist, but I also study financial education and financial socialization of young people. And I do think that a key point of this crisis is to educate and to teach the young generation more about economics and finance. What Ambassador De Luca said about his teenager son is an opportunity to teach teenagers and students that the economy in the future may not be so good, but at the same time, if they learn more about what is stagnation, deflation, inflation, they might be more able to do the right political decision or consumption decision or work decision to face the future. And that's why I also want to thank you a lot, Daniel Lacalle, because he provided to me a new narrative economics, because I'm not so familiar with some scenarios that he drew, but I think it's really very useful to give people different, different scenarios and teach them how to study and then make the right decision from the political, consumption, and work and social point of view.
Thank you really, Emanuela, for your short intervention, and thank you a lot for your idea. Of course, as I told you before, I would be very grateful to receive from you in the next day and your little relation about this Cenacolo. Now I would like to come back to Spain, and which is the country of our keynote speaker, and invited to give the floor to a friend of mine that, who helped me also to organize last year the Cenacolo Life in Madrid. I would like, I hope to come back in Madrid. It's a wonderful city. He's a lawyer. He's also head of global diplomacy at Crow. Antonio Camunas, your thoughts on the topic. Antonio? She's not. So we remain in Madrid. So I would like to ask, I give the floor to Jean-Louis Gouillon, Senior Vice President, Strategy and Business Development, HLL. Thank you, Jean-Louis.
Thank you, Francesco, for this great event. It is difficult to say anything interesting after everything that has been said so far, but I'll try my best. For me, really, as working as consultant, working with a lot of companies, and getting the input from my colleagues around the world, what I think I know is that we don't know, and I think we are at a crossroads. There might be a situation of a tipping point, and it can go, as Professor Lacalle has said, definitely one way, or it can also be the dawn of a new era. I think it's a moment of ask ourselves many questions around whether maybe globalization was not such a big deal, such a great thing. Maybe it's the end of a system that we saw at the early 80s that finished with a vision of the world after World War II, and it's maybe the end of neoliberalism. We have to look for something, but I definitely think it will be a new paradigm where more equality, and I know that some people might not dare to this word because it has a lot of lot of baggage with it. But definitely, I think this crisis, or whatever we want to call it, is definitely going over the next month to put the light in some of the dysfunctions, huge dysfunctions that our economic and our social system has. And I think that we are up for definitely some big surprises. I hope that they are good. That's all. But I really would like to hear the opinion of Professor Lacalle on the subject. And I'm really looking forward to read your book.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. Thank you, Jean-Louis. Jean-Louis participated at the Cenacolo in Madrid, and remember, he's now come back in Italy, and in Roma. We spoke about bank, and we have the director of center of Italy, of the third bank in Italy is Banca Icrea, Paolo Grignaschi. Thank you for coming, Paolo, and your thoughts on topic.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. Good evening to everybody. I will try to be as fast as possible, so I will avoid all the compliments that are due to you, Francesco, for this fantastic initiative, to Mr. Lacalle for his very stimulating speech, and to everybody, of course. I'm just saying that I'm very honored to be part of this fantastic group. I'll go straight to the point, which, as you said, in regards to the financial system, because I noted down one of the last sentences that Daniel Lacalle said. Financial sector is used to bail out the old economy. I think this is a dramatic truth, and it is exactly what is happening in Italy. The Italian government said that they put on the table to help the economy hundreds of billions, but which are mainly guarantees they give to the banks to give loans to companies. We are perfectly aware that we are going to expand loans to sectors, to companies that maybe are not due to receive this more, let's say, trust. But on the other side, living in an old economy environment, because most of Europe is made up of old economy, being local banks, I represent a group, which Francesco said, yes, is one of the largest Italian groups, but it's made up of 136 local banks. We are already very exposed with the old economy. We know that this crisis will affect us in any case, and we cannot run away from loans, because in banks, you cannot switch business, from one day to another. We are stick to the loans. So I don't think we can avoid doing this bailout, hoping that then we will not bail out ourselves by the governments. But the question is, Mr. Lacalle, what else should we do, apart from this, to be more resilient as a financial system and to be, let's say, to have a projection to the future and to be competitive in a future environment that will be surely very different from now?
Thank you so much. Wow. It's virtuous before the timing. And now I will remain in Italy, in the north of Italy. We have with us the representative of the Italian Chamber of Commerce for Brianza. So it means that Brianza is in Italy the area with the higher PIL per capita, PIL. So thank you, lawyer Lorenzo, for participating, and your short thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a lawyer. I'm a business lawyer. So I'm usually on the side of the entrepreneur, and my main role is to balance the mood of the entrepreneur, to pull up the mood or to get down the mood. Okay, to balance it. I agree with in several points of the speech of our keynote speaker. Okay, but I have only one point to clear in my mind. Okay, if the main question for me is, if now with a world crisis, and if now with a pandemic problem, global problem, if in that moment Europe is not able to be a continent with one only strategy, one only way to do, political way to do, if Europe now lose the opportunity to lead all the countries and to take the main decision for all the continent, when we can achieve a real Europe Union, it's not better that all the countries give the money to Europe and the Europe manage the money to all the countries in uniform way? That's my question.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for your contribution and the question. I also for shortly, and I remember again. To send me your paper about your thoughts. Now we have the last intervention. Normally, the last intervention has a means, because is particularly relevant. In Russia now, in Novosibirsk, more or less half past 1 hour in the morning. So there is someone that already live full in the next day. So like Christina, like Samuel, and like Arinder, who is entrepreneur and Indian. He was born in India. Okay, he studied Russian. He worked with all the world in commodities. So he has a flexible mind. You know that I wrote a book entitled Pensiero Flessibile. So I am a scholar of flexibility mind, you know. And Arinder is flexible, like all of you this evening at this table. So thank you for coming, Arinder. He participated at the Cenacolo. Daniel sure remember in Madrid the last year Cenacolo Live. Thank you for coming, Arinder, and we really would appreciate if you could please share your thoughts.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Professor Lacalle, for this wonderful opportunity to listen to your wise thoughts. Listening to different thoughts from the different countries, I admit that our inability to contribute or to offer a solution to this situation. But I believe that nature is hardly cruel. Nature is hardly cruel. And if this crisis is a natural calamity, it should make us also consider and think that nature keeps things simple, but humans, they have this tendency of errors and they make things difficult. Maybe the solution is simple and we are all looking for some difficult solutions. And the simplicity lies in the thoughts that Professor Daniel shares. My experience with Mr. Daniel Lacalle in Madrid, it helped me learn a bit from him. His wise thought was that in the previous Cenacolo was that people, that we, the government and the people, they socialize losses but privatize profits. For me, wisdom is nothing, but it is a well-dressed experience, and such experiences, they help us become more wise and share our wisdom with the people and help make life better. And I implement it. And today I noticed in his speech that we need to be, or the governments had to be more preventive and had more managerial skills. Maybe this is what had, and maybe this was the solution had the government or the managers or the ministers or the governing bodies had been more skilled in implementing the skills of having more preventive and preventional and managerial skills, this crisis would have been less disastrous, I believe. And on the other hand, I also notice, I would like to emphasize on the thoughts that people and the governments, usually people, they spend their health to earn wealth, and later on, they spend this wealth to regain the health. And it's called a rat race. And I believe this is what is happening now. It's what's going to happen. The governments, they accumulated wealth, and now they're spending this wealth to regain the health of the citizens and the country. So I would once again like to say thank you to all of you for providing this opportunity to me to share my thoughts. And I wish everyone a safe stay and a good health. Thank you.
Thank you, Arinder. Thank you, Arinder. And really, thank you, all of you. And now we arrived at 8:30. I hope that everyone can spend another 50 minutes now for the final remarks of Professor Lacalle. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much to everyone for the very, very, very interesting comments and very good remarks. I would like to start from the very interesting comments of the ones that thought that I was talking about a nightmare and a very negative scenario. Because what I found most interesting about their comments, and Mr. Masacci in particular was very clear, is that what they're doing is actually what I said, is that they are hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. And that's why they, as businessmen, and I, as a businessman, that is why you have been able to build the successful businesses that you have today. Mr. I did not get your name, but I see you mentioned, for example, how in the past his company had been strengthening its balance sheet and is keeping all the workers, which is so. This is exactly what I'm saying about the possibilities and the positives for the future, is that what these entrepreneurs are doing today is what should be done, but it is exactly the opposite of what governments are doing. That's the thing that I was saying. Okay, it is exactly the opposite. And by the way, as great entrepreneurs as you are, continue to do so. So that's my point. A few questions will Europe become weaker or stronger out of this? There's something that we all have to agree on, and I think that we can agree, is that the European Union has strengthened through crisis. We might disagree on the outcomes, we might put a lot of questions on it, but the reality is that today the euro is the second currency in the world according to the BIS, and the reality is that today the European Union has responded to its challenges, and it's learning as it goes, and it's, you know, and with its mistakes and with its positives or negatives. A good question was, will it become stronger than Russia or than the United States or China? And that is not a possibility because of another question, which was the demographic aspect. The European Union is an aging population economic zone. That's not a problem. So is Japan, and it's a very important economy. And about 20% of the European Union citizens have more than 60 years old. That should not be seen as something of weakness. It's just a different way of growing. And I think that that's what we need to start to know. And within the European Union questions as well, a very good question came up about the unification of policy. And I would radically warn against that. Because if there's anything positive about the United States, it's diversity. The reason why the United States is a success is because Illinois doesn't have the tax system of Michigan, because California doesn't have the tax system of Delaware, and because Texas doesn't have the tax system of New York. It's precisely the diversity and the fact that if Detroit collapses, it is not even bailed out by Michigan, the fact that it's working. So it's solidarity with responsibility. And that's what we need to learn. And this is what we're going to learn in this crisis in Europe, is that there's no solidarity without responsibility. My country, Spain, is trying to promote this craziness of Corona bonds or Euro bonds without any responsibility that would kill the Eurozone. But there are, as we are seeing, other mechanisms of solidarity. Great question from the ex-Prime Minister of Malta about the packages of some countries, about companies keeping jobs. And let me point out why I believe it is not bad. Okay, that's a point. That's a good point. And I thank you for saying that. But why it's wrong? Because it's aimed fundamentally at those companies that would actually do like our great entrepreneurs in the team that have the possibility of keeping the jobs. The companies that are destroying the 20 million jobs that have disappeared in the United States, or the almost million jobs that have disappeared in Spain, or we have an estimate of 57 million jobs lost in the Eurozone, are the ones that are not getting anything from those packages. The micro companies, none of the ones that we work in. The small businesses that have a shop, maybe one worker and a rented shop, that kind of thing, the little businesses, that's the problem. The packages are reasonably well designed for companies that have 20, 30 employees or more. The ones that are collapsing as we speak, I just have a figure for you to ponder. In the period of time that we have been speaking, 100 businesses in my country have disappeared in the period that we have spoken at this time. Okay. The other point that was mentioned was the problem of inequality and the issues about the model of the system and neoliberalism. I would start by asking, what is neoliberalism? I haven't seen it anywhere. The only thing I see is monster government spending, huge debt, massive deficits, and increased taxation. So I'm actually trying to find where's the neoliberalism, at least to emigrate there. But the point is inequality. And this is key. And in my book, I explain it. These policies, massive stimuli, both at the monetary and fiscal level, increase inequality. They don't decrease inequality. There is a reason why in a period of massive monetary policy stimuli and fiscal stimuli, inequality has risen, because money creation is never neutral, and it always benefits fundamentally the ones that receive it first, which are governments and their highly indebted sectors, and fundamentally impact negatively the ones that receive it last, which are real salaries and wages. I'm going to be very brief about, and I'm going to end with a question about banks. Absolutely right. You cannot just steer a ship back to one level in a minute. But if there's anything that that European banks have done phenomenally in this crisis, in this past crisis, is to address the situation of balance sheet, of non-performing loans, of profitability, and of maintaining the business in an environment in which the central bank was giving them negative rates, which is literally like swimming against the tide. So what banks need to do is to continue to do it. I said this today to the CEO of Santander, if it helps. Continue to do what you have been doing. Yeah, just don't do what governments are telling you to do. I wrote an article saying that governments want banks to eat and drink at the same time. You choke. You cannot drink and eat at the same time. You cannot strengthen your balance sheet and lend a lot more with a lot more risk and lower returns at the same time. So what, and the answer, and I finish with what should we had done. All these measures are demand side measures. These are from the government and from central bank down. And the mechanism of distribution of these measures is also dictated by the governments and the central banks. Many of these demand side measures should have been implemented in any case, and that's fine. But the majority of the measures that will have to be implemented in order to get out of the problem, because again, demand side measures are based on the idea that we will get out of this in a V-shape, okay? Most of the measures that actually will work in the long term will have to be supply side measures. So measures that allow diversification of private capital, measures that allow lower taxes so that businessmen like you can actually continue to deliver growth and continue to generate growth and jobs in an environment that might be easier for some, might be more difficult for others, but as one of you was saying, maybe you will lose money in 2020, but you will make money in 2021. But the combination of people like that, some make money, some don't, some fail, some succeed, that is actually what is going to deliver the growth. I will end up in a positive note because I don't want you to believe I was telling a nightmare. I expected the final remarks to be more positive. The essence of what is the solution is what all of you have been mentioning in the last words, etc., which is the integration of the knowledge of each and every one of you and the experience of each and every one of us in order to figure out what, I think it was our good friend from France that said that the only thing that he knew was that he didn't know. No, exactly. So if all of us here that we're so, and with the experience, the vast years of experience that everybody has, don't know, I can guarantee you that Mr. Macron, Ms. Merkel, Mr. Trump, Mr. Sanchez, and Mr. Johnson don't know either. So let's not give them the power to decide what will be. Let's generate that improvement through more integration. And what I want to warn against is the rising interventionism. You have fantastic entrepreneurs from Russia, great entrepreneurs from France, from Italy, from everywhere, from Malta, from Spain, from everywhere. We need more integration. We don't need less. Governments will push for less because that gives them more power. We will have more protectionism. So our job, as we finish this beautiful Cenacolo, is to continue to defend more integration, more cooperation, and better chains of of understanding between each other instead of more protectionism and more interventionism. Thank you so much for this magnificent opportunity.
Thank you to you, Daniel. This your invitation about integration of information, sharing knowledge. I personally will give like address, like really a job to do, and for this reason, I again wait your paper, the paper of the participant, and I could collect and also send to you, Daniel, so we can work at a job that could be interesting also for politicians and economists and people, decision maker. So really, I thanks all of you. Now I put all unmute, and I invite again, make a applause to Daniel Lacalle.
Thank you.
See you next Cenacolo.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, and thank you,
Antonio. Antonio,
Thank you,
I asked
everybody.
your world, and but you didn't answer, Antonio.
I had an important call from a very important client. And I
Okay.
had